My name is Amber Wilson. I'm 24 years old, and 3 weeks before my wedding, my father summoned me to our family home in Austin, where my mother and younger brother were already waiting in the living room like some kind of jury. Without a trace of emotion, he declared, "We're not paying for this circus." He called my fiancé Alex, not suitable for a normal future, while my mother agreed and my brother laughed in my face. They thought they had humiliated me beyond repair. But they had no idea whose wedding they were trying to cancel. Before I reveal what happened next, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you've ever felt underestimated by your own family. I grew up in Texas in a house where love was spoken of like a brand we couldn't quite afford. We had the big stone facade, the circle driveway, the iron star over the garage, and a lawn guy who came every Thursday at 7 a.m. sharp. What we didn't have were soft mornings or messy hugs. Everything was polished for show, like the foyer mirror my mother wiped daily, just in case someone important dropped by and saw fingerprints of real life smudged across the glass. My father ran a construction company and spoke in imperatives that landed like hammers. Up. Move. Stop. Enough. His phone was glued to his ear, his truck smelled like sawdust and coffee, and his temper sounded like rebar being dragged across concrete. At dinner, he didn't ask questions. He issued summaries. Bids won, deadlines missed, crews he'd whip into shape. When I was small, I believed people followed him because he knew things. When I got older, I realized they obeyed because he never considered the possibility of being wrong. My mother curated our lives the way she curated her Pinterest boards, seasonal, coordinated, tested against public opinion. She rotated wreaths and opinions with the same brisk efficiency: blue hydrangeas in May, moral outrage in June, pumpkin velvet ribbons in October, and what will the neighbors think all year long. On Sundays, she wore a pearl bracelet that clicked gently on the pew when she folded her hands to pray. After church, she'd analyze everyone's outfits over pot roast, rehearsing our family's lines for the week, what to say about Dad's new client, which charity event to mention, who we were decidedly not like. Then there was Trevor, my younger brother, the family son. Even when his grades were lowercase and his effort was a rumor, the light bent toward him. Dad called him a natural. Mom called him my pride. When Trevor got AC in algebra, Dad laughed and said, "Real men don't need letters to build empires." When he forgot to pick me up from school because he was busy, Mom said he was learning to manage his own schedule. When he dented the side of the Tahoe, Dad patted his shoulder and said, "Happens to men who drive." I learned to swallow the part of me that wanted it to happen to Trevor's consequences, too. By contrast, I was the family's dreamer with no plan, a phrase they said so often it felt embroidered on my pillowcase. I studied late and kept color-coded notebooks. I graduated college with honors, the metal ribbon cutting into my neck while my parents took photos like it was a novelty. "Look at our Amber," Mom said to the dean. Such imagination, like I'd brought craft glitter instead of grades. At dinner, Dad said, "Honors are fine, but life's not a book." Trevor asked if the medal came with a job. I laughed like I was in on the joke, even as it bored a little hole through my chest. Our house had rules that weren't written, but everyone obeyed. During weekdays, the kitchen island belonged to Mom's immaculate fruit bowl and my father's mail. No homework, no clutter, no reality. Achievements were framed if they could be displayed: Trevor's all-star photo in the hallway, Dad's Chamber of Commerce plaque by the entry table. Mine were sweet and filed in a drawer. Feelings were permitted only in the direction of status: joy over Dad's new truck, pride in Trevor's pass, embarrassment if a cousin posted something tacky on Facebook. I learned to edit myself like a caption: short, pleasant, and unlikely to offend anyone's timeline. Birthdays told the truth about our hierarchy. For Trevor, a backyard crawfish boil, a rented speaker, a line of trucks in the driveway. For me, a monogrammed planner and a polite dinner at a restaurant with a raw bar Mom could mention later. When I turned 18, I asked for a road trip with friends. Dad said travel was for people without responsibilities, then surprised Trevor with a lakeside weekend because boys need to blow off steam. I blew out candles and promised myself I wouldn't spend my life waiting for permission. Holidays were group projects where Mom graded us on presentation. Christmas trees with themed ornaments, silver and white the year the mayor's wife came by, rustic buffalo plaid when the local magazine ran a feature on Texas Cozy. Thanksgiving was a photo op for gratitude that couldn't withstand a follow-up question. "We're so blessed," Mom would sigh, then whisper in the kitchen that the Hendersons' new countertops were trying too hard. Dad carved the turkey like he was demonstrating a tool, then lectured Trevor about the importance of optics while I mashed potatoes in perfect circles, wishing I could scrape the word optics out of my ears. In high school, I joined yearbook, mostly to exist behind the camera where no one could tell me how to smile. I learned to notice what other people overlooked: the nervous thumb rubbing at a napkin, the teacher who carried extra granola bars, the kid who never ordered anything at the burger place because he wasn't hungry. I wrote captions that made shy kids visible. When the book won an award, my advisor hugged me in the hallway. At home, Dad flipped through it, nodded, and said, "Nice hobby." Mom asked why my picture wasn't on more pages. Trevor said the football spread should have been bigger. College was 4 hours away and felt like a country where my passport finally worked. I called home on Sundays and practiced sounding smaller. "Classes are fine." "No, I'm not dating anyone serious." "Yes, I'm eating." When I won a departmental grant, Mom said, "Careful bragging, people envy girls who don't deserve it." When I was inducted into an honor society, Dad said, "You're building a resume, not a life." Trevor texted me a blurry selfie at a tailgate with the caption, "Real college." I deleted my replies a lot that year. Back home on breaks, the house seemed louder, as if every cabinet had learned to slam. Dad's phone calls bled into dinner. Mom's critiques sharpened. Trevor discovered banter, which meant a steady drip of mockery disguised as love. "Lighten up," he'd say, after drawing a circle around my efforts with a red pen only he could see. The more I accomplished, the more it felt like I'd violated a family treaty. "Don't outgrow the narrative we wrote for you." By the time I moved into my first apartment, I had learned to hold my own hand. I paid bills on time, kept plants alive, and bought a secondhand sofa that didn't apologize for existing. When I called home, I measured my words like salt. "Work is good. I'm fine." The familiar backdrop remained: Dad's orders, Mom's optics, Trevor's effortless elevation. Their coldness no longer shocked me. It had simply become the climate I grew up in, the air I learned to breathe. To my family, I looked threadbare by design. A dented Honda with a stubborn check engine light, a one-bedroom with mismatched plates, jeans that had given up on their original color. I let them think I was barely scraping by, because their pity was quieter than their pride. If they believed I was fragile, they left me alone. It was the only way to build anything in peace. The truth started when I was 19 and tired of watching other people control every room I walked into. I was working weekends as a hostess, juggling seating charts and furious brides, while the manager squinted at a paper ledger like it was ancient scripture. Couples kept calling to ask if a date was free, then calling again because someone else had promised it 5 minutes later. I sketched the first version of my app on a stack of cocktail napkins, calendars that synced in real time, filters for capacity and price, transparent holds that expired automatically. I named it Lumen because you could finally see what was actually available. I learned enough Swift and JavaScript from free courses and a couple of $19.99 Udemy classes to build a passable prototype. I bribed a classmate with brisket tacos to polish the back end. For data, I went door to door, VFW halls, church basements, hill country barns that smelled like hay and spilled beer. Owners liked 2 things: no double bookings and guaranteed deposits. I gave them both, took a small cut, and answered support emails on my thrift store couch with a space heater pointed at my ankles. Our first 100 venues came from a Facebook group for budget brides and a Reddit thread I refreshed until the letters blurred. Weddings are weird. They're personal, emotional, and wildly logistical. The app worked because it solved something boring and painful. 6 months in, a regional event company offered to license Lumen for their internal use, and 2 months after that, a national aggregator asked to buy it outright. My hands shook when the lawyer slid the paperwork across the table. $8 million. I was 19 with a bank account that looked like a misprint. I didn't buy a new car. I didn't move. I turned off push notifications from every person who had ever told me to be realistic, and I set up an LLC before the wire hit. Taxes first. Then strategy. I knew software alone wouldn't scratch the itch I felt every time a bride cried because the florals were late or the caterer forgot the vegetarian count. The money from Lumen was a door, not a destination. I started buying places where celebrations could live. The first was a foreclosed limestone mansion outside Dripping Springs with a collapsing pergola and a view that made you forget you were standing in raccoon footprints. I hired a project manager under a non-disclosure agreement and paid every contractor on time. We resurfaced the terrace, rebuilt the kitchen to commercial standards, and installed a sound system that didn't screech when someone touched a microphone. I called it Aurora House. Friday nights became rehearsal dinners, Saturdays were weddings, Sundays turned into brunches with grandparents taking photos beside the rosemary hedge. Then I invested in restaurants that were already beloved but poorly run. I didn't buy their names, I bought their pain points. We standardized ordering, negotiated supplier contracts, trained servers to communicate in hand signals so the line didn't melt down at 7:15. I learned the difference between a chef who needs a new oven and a chef who needs to sleep. I learned linen math. I learned that bathrooms decide Yelp reviews and that parking lots decide whether a grandmother can make it to the toast. Growth came like a series of small, relentless decisions. A Victorian in Waco with stained glass windows that turned aisle walks into watercolor. A ranch near San Antonio with oaks big enough to hang 50 lanterns. A downtown warehouse with brick walls and skylights for winter weddings that hated being called winter. I built a central kitchen to handle overflow, an in-house floral team for last-minute rescues, and a call center that actually picked up. We tested chairs until we found the one people sat in for 7 hours without cursing. We kept a closet of emergency ties, safety pins, baby wipes, and blotting papers because someone always needed to be saved from themselves. But I kept my name hidden. The operating company was Aurora Venues. The holding entities were boring shells with forgettable letters. I signed as manager, not owner. Executives called me Ms. W, like we were in a spy movie. My email lived behind a firewall of assistants who knew never to say Amber aloud. I paid above market, offered health insurance on day one, and instituted the only non-negotiable policy I cared about. No one raises their voice at staff. If a client yelled, I handled it, and I handled it with a smile that could cut glass. Every time we opened a new property, I drove out alone at dawn. I'd walk the perimeter with a coffee in my frozen hand and talk to the place like it was a person. We're going to make you shine. You're going to hold someone's best memory. I remember the first time a groom hugged a dishwasher after midnight because the dishwasher found the missing ring in a drain trap. That's the part no one sees. How many strangers must do their jobs well so two people can say I do without thinking about logistics? 5 years stretched and snapped and reknit themselves around the work. I didn't post about it. I wore Old Navy and a blowout I did myself. When I met friends, I said I was in events, which is technically true and delightfully vague. At home, I ate omelets at the counter and fell asleep with spreadsheets open on my laptop. I bought nothing flashy except time, onboarding manuals that trained managers so well I could finally stop answering the phone at 2 a.m. I hired a CFO who loved guardrails and a COO who loved checklists. We ran site visits like theater. We tracked every complaint and built a ritual to make that complaint impossible for the next couple. Somewhere in the middle of a quarter where I forgot to replace the batteries in my smoke detector, the valuation crystallized. Private equity wanted in. We said yes on our terms. Aurora Venues became a $1.9 billion corporation with a board deck I could recite in my sleep and a logo I still doodled on napkins when I was nervous. I bought a small stake back every time I could because owning the story matters more than telling it. Only Alex knew. He knew when my hands trembled after the first acquisition and when I couldn't eat before payroll, even though we had cash for years. He kept my secret like it was his own heartbeat. Alex sat with me on the floor of my apartment, eating takeout lo mein out of the carton while I worried about a groom whose dad wanted to turn the reception into a networking event. You build rooms for joy, he said, pinching my sleeve. Let them earn their way into it. To everyone else, I was the girl with the old car and the practical shoes, the dreamer with no plan who somehow paid her rent on time. I let them think that. It kept me safe. It kept the work pure. People underestimate the quiet, and the quiet gets things done. The funny thing is, the hall that my parents canceled, Aurora Pavilion, belonged to me. When I got home, I didn't cry. I hung my keys on the hook, set my phone on the counter, and let the apartment's small, steady silence do what it always did, remind me that calm is a choice. I filled the kettle, watched the blue flame catch, and pulled my laptop closer like a familiar ally. No mascara streaks, no dramatic music. Just tea, a spreadsheet, and the clean click of a plan forming. First call, my manager, Maya. I put her on speaker and opened the Aurora venue's dashboard. Bookings. Holds. Vendor chains. On my screen, the Aurora Pavilion reservation glowed in the same tidy green as any other couple's, except this one had my name in the internal VIP tag and a stack of linked contracts beneath it. Walk me through the cancellation, I said, steady as an accountant. Timestamp, user method. Maya exhaled. Cancellation request hit the system at 3:11 p.m. It referenced contract AP 7731 and the companion service orders, catering, florals, lighting. The requester attached a signed release form, owner authorization included. She paused. Amber, the signature block says you authorized it. I enlarged the PDF. The signature looked almost right, same angled A, same impatient tail on the R, but the pressure was wrong, like someone tracing memory instead of muscle. The date sat one day in the future. Sloppy. Who submitted it? I asked. External address, Maya said. Gmail. Caller ID matched your mother's cell earlier when they tried to confirm the refund decision. We didn't process anything. We escalated to legal hold because the owner line was weird. Good, I said. Keep the hold. No refunds. No exceptions. If they call again, keep it courteous and logged. No one mentions ownership. Route anything resembling a threat to legal. Understood, she said, and I could hear her already drafting the internal memo we'd practiced a dozen times for exactly this kind of moment. I'll flag the Pavilion team and shut down third-party access on the file. Second call, my lawyer, Elena Ruiz. I forwarded the documents before she even picked up. She answered on the first ring. Tell me you didn't sign this, she said. I didn't. The authorization is a fake. The user isn't ours. The date stamp is wrong. She skimmed. I heard the rustle of paper and the soft percussion of her pen against a legal pad. All right. What we have here, at minimum, is attempted fraud. Potential forgery of your signature, misrepresentation to induce a refund, and interference with existing contracts. If a refund had gone out, we'd be discussing conversion and wire fraud exposure. As it is, it's a clean attempted act. She switched into her list voice, the one that made judges and opposing counsel rethink their day. Immediate steps: preserve every scrap of metadata. Lock the booking, retain the server logs, export the call records and emails into a read-only vault. I'll draft a cease and desist to the number and address used. We'll also prepare a criminal referral packet, quietly. No filings yet. We hold it in escrow until we see how far they push. I sipped my tea. It tasted like iron, the way black tea does when you forget to pull the bag. And what about the vendors? Notify in-house teams that owner authorization is disputed. No changes without your explicit sign-off. If anyone shows up waiving permission, security calls me first, you second. She paused. And Amber? Do not confront your parents. Not yet. Let them talk themselves into mistakes. People who think they own the room forget about cameras. I smiled without humor. They always have. After we hung up, I built the file the way Elena had taught me. Neutral titles, timestamped notes, screenshots with hash values, no commentary, just facts in order. I printed a hard copy and locked it in the small fireproof safe behind my baking flour. Flour first, inheritance second. My mother would have choked on the metaphor. I sent 3 internal messages. One to the Pavilion general manager, proceed as scheduled. All requests must be countersigned by me. If a caller insists I've approved something, ask for a written confirmation from my Aurora address and call Maya. 1 to our finance director. Freeze any refund related to AP 7731. Manual review only. Elevate suspicious activity. 1 to the concierge team. If you receive hostile language, you're authorized to end the call after a warning. Log everything. Then I did the boring things that make a plan stick. I checked the entry camera on my building and saved a fresh clip of me coming home alone at 5:52 p.m. I photographed the envelope my father had handed me earlier in case someone claimed I'd delivered documents. I plugged in my old Honda's dash cam and cleared the card so the next drive would write to empty. I texted Alex, home. Working. Nothing to worry about. He replied with a heart and no questions. The apartment looked the way I left it that morning, plant with 2 new leaves, a takeout menu sliding under the fridge magnet, a draft seating chart still open on my laptop as if the day hadn't tried to rip it apart. I warmed leftovers, set the fork down between bites, and made myself chew all the way through. Planning is a physical act before it's a legal one. Breathing, eating, sleeping. People make terrible choices when they're hungry. When I finished, I walked through my checklist again, not because I doubted it, but because repetition is how panic loses its teeth. Contracts, locked. Refunds, frozen. Ownership, undisclosed. Counsel, engaged. Staff, briefed. Evidence, preserved. I pictured the flowchart on our office wall titled Crisis Without Drama. We'd built it for hurricanes and vendor bankruptcies. Family didn't make the list, but the steps were the same. Contain, document, de-escalate, wait. I thought about calling my parents, about launching into the speech I'd written 100 times in my head since high school, the one where I explained the difference between control and care. I set my phone back down. Elena was right. People who bully systems always assume everyone else is bluffing. The next day began like a drill I'd practiced: kettle, oatmeal, inbox. I kept my phone face down, ringtone off, the way you do when you're trying to keep your pulse from learning new tricks. Son slid over the counter and found the little coffee ring I'd forgotten to wipe. I was spooning brown sugar when the phone vibrated hard enough to skate across the marble. Dad. I let it buzz once more, then swiped. Hello. He didn't bother with hello. His breath landed first, ragged, uneven, then his voice, pitched higher than I'd ever heard it, like it had been tightened with pliers. Amber, what's going on? Paper rustled on his end. Something clattered. Aurora Pavilion said they won't refund the money and that the owner's decision is final. Do you know anything? I pressed the spoon flat into the oatmeal so it wouldn't rattle against the bowl. What exactly did they tell you? I asked, as if I didn't already have the email transcript saved twice. He huffed, a sound I knew from 1,000 childhood mornings. They said, he repeated, slower, angrier, that the owner, he bit each syllable, has decided there will be no refund, and that all cancellations must be authorized by the owner. They said the decision is final. He lowered his voice on final like it offended him personally. We signed papers. Your mother faxed the release. This is ridiculous. I could hear my mother somewhere behind him, the sharp whisper of her consonants trying to direct the scene, and the squeak of a chair as Trevor leaned back to watch. In my apartment, the kettle clicked off. Steam sighed. I let the silence stretch just enough to cool the tea. I wonder, Dad, I said, smooth as a meeting agenda, who is the owner? It was like dropping a glass in a quiet room. The sound after isn't the shatter, it's the air realizing what it has to hold. On the line, something stopped moving. No paper. No clatter. Only his breath, suddenly careful, counting steps on a staircase he'd never noticed beneath his feet. Amber, he asked finally, the word small without a command attached. Then he tried to reassemble himself with volume. Don't play games. Your mother said the coordinator told her. The coordinator told her I finished, that only the owner can authorize a refund. So I'm asking, who do you think that is? Another pause, shorter, hotter. I imagined the way his eyes cut to my mother, to the phone, to the ceiling, searching for a script. He'd lived his whole life inside rooms where he was the owner by assumption. What are you saying? He asked. Not a challenge, for once. A question. I'm saying, I replied, keeping my voice level enough to balance a glass on, that the owner made a decision. The line tightened. I heard the faintest click, my mother picking up on the extension, then dropping it when she realized I would hear. A door closed somewhere at their house. A pen rolled. He cleared his throat. The sound came out wrong, like a motor that doesn't trust its own ignition. Aurora Pavilion, he said slowly, testing the words as if they might sting, is part of that. Aurora Place. Aurora Venues. He breathed through his nose, and the truth crossed whatever Bridget had been avoiding. Amber. My name again, but different this time, shaped by a mouth that had just tasted the boundary of its own power. Are you telling me you? I asked you a simple question, I said, not rescuing him. Who is the owner? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The quiet between us did it for him. It was the quiet of a tape measure snapping back into its case, of a gavel that never had to fall because the courtroom already understood. I watched a bead of condensation slide down the side of my mug and disappear into the coaster's cork. I'll take that as clarity, I said, gentler than I felt. He tried one more angle, habit lifting its head even as comprehension pressed it down. Look, he said, scraping for gravel, this whole thing got out of hand. Your mother thought she had authority. She didn't, I said. And the money, 75%, that's standard refund policy. Not for this account. Different policy. Owner's discretion. I kept my tone light, like we were talking about rain. He swallowed. The sound traveled the wire and landed in my kitchen. We weren't. We didn't mean. The sentence failed. He rerouted. Can we talk about this like adults, Amber? Face to face. We are, I said. You called me. We're talking. The old cadence, the one that had made contractors jump and made me 12 again, tried to surface. I am your father, he said, as if the title itself had legal force. Then, softer, the truth tugging at his sleeve, I didn't know. I believed him, and that was the strangest part. All those years of being sure he knew everything, and the thing that undid him was the one he never bothered to imagine. The so-called circus. The one he had canceled like a dinner reservation. On his end, the office clock ticked. On mine, a delivery truck rattled past, making the spoons in the drawer tremble against each other like a tiny applause I didn't deserve. I had no interest in gloating. That's a hungry fire that eats the cook. I only wanted the moment to land where it belonged. I have a call in 5, I said, which was true in the sense that I could make it true. Is there anything else you need to tell me about refunds or decisions? He let out a breath that sounded older than he was. No, he said, the word deflated to its outline. No, I suppose not. Okay. I let the single word sit upright. Then we're done for now. He didn't hang up. Neither did I. We listened to the static of a connection that had changed temperature. Finally, he said, very quietly, Amber. Yes. But he didn't finish whatever he thought he might say. The line clicked. The screen flashed, call ended. I set the phone down beside my cooling breakfast and stared at the tiny coffee ring until it stopped pretending to be a moon. He didn't call back that morning, but the silence felt loaded, like a ceiling that knew it was about to leak. By noon, the pavilion's general manager texted to say a couple had shown up demanding to speak to the person in charge of this scam. It was my parents. I told him to offer water, keep them comfortable, and do nothing else until I arrived. Then I changed into a navy dress that didn't wrinkle, tied my hair back, and drove the old Honda like it was still part of the disguise I wasn't sure I needed anymore. They were waiting in the lobby under the chandelier I chose 2 years ago after rejecting 8 others. Mom was pacing, face flushed in a way that usually meant she'd already picked a villain and it wasn't going to be her. Dad stood planted near the marble table, pretending to read a brochure, jaw tight enough to crack a peppercorn. Trevor was sprawled on a velvet settee, scrolling with the practiced boredom of a person who thinks attention is a currency that appreciates when hoarded. Ms. Wilson, the concierge, called out the minute I crossed the threshold, posture straightening into the quiet deference our staff kept for owners and brides. Shall I bring your guests to the garden room? My mother's head snapped up. Guests, she repeated, eyes flicking from the concierge's name tag to my face, trying to reframe the hierarchy without breaking her neck. Dad's brochure drooped like a surrender flag. Trevor lowered his phone a fraction, looking for a joke. Yes, I said. Let's do the garden room. I walked first, because that's where the power lives, in who chooses the hallway. No one spoke as we passed the gallery of framed photos, couples mid-laugh, grandparents hugging, friends holding sparklers like the world could only get brighter. Every image was the opposite of how I grew up. I could feel my father reading the price tag on each sconce. I could feel my mother counting who she would invite to be photographed under the ivy wall. The garden room's doors whispered shut behind us. It smelled like citrus polish and peonies in water. The pavilion manager, Louis, appeared with a tray, 4 glasses, 1 carafe, linen napkins folded into clean triangles. He nodded to me, then to them. Water, he asked kindly, because we teach kindness even when we don't have to. Dad answered by sitting. Mom stayed standing just long enough to remind everyone she could. Amber, she began, tone pitched to suggestible jury. This is all a misunderstanding. Your father and I. The refund request was fraudulent, I said. It used my signature without consent. It attempted to alter contracts that don't belong to you. There will be no refund. Trevor let out a soft yikes, like he was watching a reality show and not our life. Dad lifted his hand, a gesture that had always meant stop, but it wavered in the air without landing. He turned to Louis. Young man, we need to speak to whoever owns this place. Louis looked at me. You're speaking to her, I said. They didn't believe me. Not at first. Belief would have required a faster recalibration than any of them had practiced. Mom's mouth parted. The performance in her eyes tripped over the prompter. Dad went still in the way that meant he was inventorying exits. Trevor laughed once, incredulous. No way, he said, like a kid who's just found out Santa is real and owes him a gaming chair. Louis set the tray down, pivoted as we'd rehearsed 100 times with investors. Ms. Wilson, do you want the pavilion portfolio? I nodded. He retrieved a leather folder from the credenza, opened to the first tab. Aurora Pavilion. Acquisition date, occupancy timelines, capex budget, net promoter score, owner's signature, my name, clean and ordinary. The next tab held a map of our properties across 3 states, a photo of the central kitchen, a bulleted list of metrics my father would respect because numbers sound like truth even when it's standing in front of you. He stared. Trevor leaned forward. Mom reached out and touched the paper like it might smudge and reveal the real name underneath. You're kidding, Dad said, voice gravelly, as if the words had to fight their way through a line of excuses. You're telling me this is yours? Aurora Venues is my company, I said. The pavilion is part of it. Silence arrived with a rush, then emptied out like a tide. The roles in the room shifted on their tracks. Dad's eyes did a fast math he couldn't show. Mom's spine softened like it had been braced against weather that suddenly turned calm. Trevor put his phone face down for the first time in a year. And then, like someone had flipped a home staging sign from before to after, the fawning began. We're so proud of you, Mom breathed, both hands fluttering to her chest. It came out reflexive, practiced, a line she'd been saving for a better audience. If only we had known earlier. We could have, she trailed off into a montage of imagined support, all of it clean and photogenic, none of it real. Dad cleared his throat and went for the handshake he reserved for potential partners. Impressive, he said, and the word was so clumsy in his mouth I almost felt sorry for it. Very impressive. You should have told us, Amber. We're family. We could have. You canceled my wedding, I said evenly. Yesterday. He swallowed. The handshake fell midair and turned into an awkward adjustment of his watch band. We were concerned, he tried. About costs, optics. As parents, as owners, we don't use forged signatures, I said, and watched the sentence pierce him in the only place with nerves left. Trevor's smile shifted into something mercantile. Okay, but this is huge, he said, tapping the portfolio like it might hatch more zeros. Aurora has, massive buzz. I could help with PR. TikTok reels, behind the scenes, owner stories, people eat that up. We could do a Meet the Visionary series. He pointed at me, then mimed a camera frame with his fingers, all charm and angles. I know a guy at an agency. Trevor, I said, we have a PR team. But family content converts, he barreled on, sensing a new ladder and shinier rung. People love legacy arcs, small-town girl to big-time CEO, with, like, a philanthropic twist. I could manage it, make sure you're protected. You don't have to pay me like a vendor, we can do a family rate. He smirked at the manager. Kidding. Kind of. Mom jumped in, sensing which flag might win the most territory. We can throw a celebration, she said. A proper one. Invite the mayor, the chamber, we must call Pastor Lee. He adores a success story. This is exactly what our community needs to see. A young woman building something so substantial. She touched my arm and lowered her voice, a soft stage aside. And about Alex, she added, tasting his name to see if it still mattered. If he's important to you, we'll embrace that. We just didn't have the full picture. Yesterday, they called him not suitable. Today, he was a supporting character in a film they wanted to premiere. Dad nodded like he'd made peace with a decision he hadn't been invited to. We were strict, he said, recasting, because we didn't want you taken advantage of. Now that we know what you've built, we can protect it together. I could look at your contractor bids, your margins. Construction's my world. Imagine what we could do as a family. As a family? The words echo so differently when they're offered from below. I sat back, seeing us for what we had become, the same people, rearranged furniture. Yesterday, I was the child with the dreamer label stitched into my skin. Today, I was a portfolio to be managed, a platform to be stood on. Louis excused himself with a glance that asked, "You good?" I nodded. He left us with the hum of the HVAC and the delicate clink of expanding ambition. I decided to let them talk. People reveal themselves fastest when they're certain you'll agree. They built an alternate history in that room. How Mom's sharp eyes would have found the perfect chandelier sooner if she'd known she was shopping for us. How Dad's connections would have accelerated permitting. How Trevor's audience insights would have added authenticity. They praised my taste in linens, my savvy in acquisitions, my discipline in choosing restraint. They tried on the vocabulary of respect like a new blazer, stiff at the shoulders, tag still on. They asked numbers they would never have allowed me to ask them. Revenue per seat, cost curves, percentage of cancellations. Dad circled the topic of equity like a hawk reading wind. You know, he said casually, families often create trusts to consolidate holdings. For protection. You anchor it, we contribute advisory roles. He smiled the smile he used on clients just before he told them his price. We'd look unified. Unity is a behavioral metric, I said. Not a paperwork one. He blinked. Trevor laughed and typed something into his phone about quotables. Mom squeezed my hand. We can start over, she whispered, as if the problem were a misunderstanding over appetizers and not a pattern etched into years. What I felt wasn't triumph. It was clarity. Their sudden warmth was like the Texas sun after a storm, blinding, insistent, and ready to bleach anything if you stood under it too long. They had humiliated Alex and me yesterday without a second thought. Today, they were wildly interested in money and ready-made prestige served on a silver platter they hadn't polished. I let my gaze rest on the portfolio, on the neat grid of numbers that represented 10,000 invisible kindnesses by staff who would never meet my parents. In those cells lived the florist who stayed late to fix a torn boutonniere, the dishwasher who found the ring, the security guard who helped a grandmother to her car. The success they were fawning over wasn't a miracle. My mother mistook my quiet for softness and pressed her advantage. We'll make a statement, she said brightly. A family photo here. The caption can say how proud we are of our daughters. No, I said, and the words settled on the table with a weight that didn't need italics. No statements. No campaigns. Not now. Dad's jaw worked. Trevor's eyebrows climbed, then fell. Mom pulled back, hurt lapping at the edges of her smile. We're trying, she said. We're here. Isn't that what you wanted? What I wanted was simple and too complicated to fit into that room. Love that wasn't a ledger. Attention that wasn't an invoice. Respect that didn't require evaluation. I folded my hands, the same way I do when a venue tour veers toward demands that don't match the contract. You're here, I said. Not for me. For what I built. They didn't deny it. People rarely do when you say the quiet part gently enough. My father reached for his water, buying time. Trevor glanced at the chandelier and mentally storyboarded it into an Instagram reel. My mother's eyes searched my face for a door she could open with the right compliment. Yesterday, I was their problem. But today, I was their opportunity. And that is not the same as being their daughter. So I went straight to the point. You're not invited to the wedding, I told them, my voice calm but unshakable. My father's face flushed crimson, his fist curling as if he'd been insulted in front of his workers. My mother gasped dramatically, hand flying to her chest as though I'd just stabbed her. And Trevor, of course, laughed, the nervous, mocking kind of laugh he'd used since childhood to mask insecurity. This is a family matter, my father barked, his chair scraping loudly against the polished floor as he stood. How dare you exclude us from your own wedding? Do you know how ridiculous you sound? My mother chimed in, her tone syrupy but cutting underneath. Amber, sweetheart, you're just upset. You don't mean this. A wedding without family is shameful. People will talk. Think of what the neighbors will say. I let them talk. For once, I didn't interrupt with explanations or apologies. I just watched them flail in the same way they always had, grasping for control, trying to twist guilt into chains. Trevor leaned back with a smirk. Come on, sis. Don't be dramatic. Let's be real, you need us there. The press eats this kind of thing up. Imagine the headlines. Estranged family reconciles at billionaire's wedding. I can spin this, make you look good. But cutting us off. He shook his head. That's a PR nightmare. Something in me snapped then. For years, their voices had been the background music of my life. Cold, sarcastic, dismissive. But at that moment, I realized how conditional it all had been. If I was poor, I was a shame. If I was rich, I was their pride. And if I dared to set a boundary, suddenly, I was selfish. I looked each of them in the eye. Your love comes with terms. And I'm done with it. If Alex and I weren't good enough yesterday, then you don't get to stand beside us tomorrow. That's not how love works. The room went still. My father opened his mouth to argue, but the words never came. My mother's face crumpled, not with sorrow, but with fury that her usual tricks weren't working. Trevor muttered something under his breath, but even he didn't sound convinced anymore. I stood, my chair sliding neatly back into place as if to punctuate my decision. I won't be controlled anymore, I said. Not by guilt, not by status, not by fear of what people might whisper at church or in some country club dining room. This wedding will be filled with love, not conditions. I walked out before they could stop me. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. October 15th arrived like a clean white page. I woke before the sun, made coffee in my little kitchen, and pressed my palms to the cool counter until my heartbeat steadied. My dress hung from the closet door like quiet snow. Alex texted a single heart, and, beneath it, see you at our pavilion. Our pavilion. The words warmed me more than the coffee. I drove the old Honda to the Aurora Pavilion on purpose, windows down to the soft Texas air. The building waited with the calm confidence of a place that knows what joy looks like. Inside, the hall shimmered, garlands threaded with warm bulbs draped the beams, and the mirrored bar threw back a soft constellation of light. The flowers smelled like October, eucalyptus, garden roses, a little rosemary for luck. My team worked with their familiar ballet, Maya checking final cues, Louis tying napkins with the tiny navy ribbons I picked months ago. Friends filled the room long before guests were seated. Jessa from college hugged me hard enough to crease the satin and whispered, "You, not your receipts." Mr. Patel, my neighbor who brings in my mail when I travel, held my hands like a father and said he was honored to be here. No one asked about valuations, revenue, or how I'd pulled it off. They asked if I'd eaten. They asked if my shoes were comfortable. They told stories about times I'd made space for them when no one else did. I walked through the hall, shining under the garlands, and felt the truth of it. These were my people. We did our first look in the little courtyard behind the jasmine wall. Alex turned, and everything hushed. The world narrowed to his brown eyes, a tremble in his smile, the way his hands hovered like I was both fragile and indestructible. "Hi," he said, as if we were meeting for the first time, and he couldn't believe his luck. Hi, I said back, and I meant it like a promise. Somewhere a cart rattled by. Someone laughed. The breeze lifted my veil and set it down again as gently as a napkin on a lap. The ceremony began at golden hour. Our officiant, a friend who once helped me move a leaking espresso machine at midnight, kept it simple. We stood beneath an oak wrapped in lights, the aisle lined with candles in low glass. When he asked us to speak our vows, my voice didn't shake. I told Alex I would choose him in the quiet hours when no one else would know, and in the loud ones when everyone would. He told me I was his home. The applause afterward sounded like a long exhale. Cocktail hours slid into dinner without anyone hurting or shushing. We served family-style brisket, roasted carrots with thyme, and little cast-iron skillets of mac and cheese that vanished faster than the waiters could set them down. My cousin not by blood, Tasha, clinked her glass and gave a toast about the patient kind of love that grows where work is done well. Our band tuned a slow standard into something that made the candle flames lean forward to listen. Under the open sky, we danced. The night was cool enough for goosebumps, warm enough to forget them. Alex's palm found the small of my back like it had always belonged there. I remember the exact weight of his shoulder under my hand, the way he mouthed the words "I love you" between verses as if the music needed subtitles. Lights pulled across the lawn, and our friends spun through them like fireflies in good shoes. Someone hooped at the Big Dip, someone else cried softly and didn't pretend not to. When the song ended, people kept swaying, unwilling to hand the moment back. My phone lived face down in the bridal suite, silenced. During a quick slip away to blot my lipstick, I checked it. Missed calls stacked like bricks. Dad. Mom. Mom. Unknown. Trevor. Voicemail after voicemail. Texts with subject lines in the body. Demands dressed up as concern. Family belongs at a wedding. We can still fix this. Call immediately. My thumb hovered. Then I selected all and deleted. Not in anger, more like spring cleaning. Messages that didn't fit the room I wanted to live in had to go. Back outside, we cut the cake, almond with raspberry, simple and honest. The frosting left a sweet cloud on my tongue. Kids chased each other between the lanterns. Grandma Jean's friend Irene asked Alex to twirl her, and he did, careful of her knees and extravagant with his smile. I saw my staff at the edge of the lawn, watching like proud stagehands. I waved them in for dessert. They shook their heads at first, then came anyway, napkins tucked into collars, eyes shining. We signed the license in the library, my hand steady, Alex's name neat beside mine. I slid my ring against the paper as if to anchor ink to intent. When we rejoined the party, the band turned playful. Take your person to the floor, playful, shoes come off, playful. I kicked mine under the sweetheart table and surprised myself with how light my body felt. Near midnight, sparklers hissed and the line formed, a glowing corridor of the people who had earned this view. Alex kissed my temple. Ready? He asked. I looked back at the pavilion, the windows bright, garlands still humming, the oak holding its tiny stars, and felt no ache for what wasn't there. I nodded. We walked through the light and heat and laughter, faces I loved flickering by like a reel I could watch forever. In the car, someone had tucked a blanket over the seat and 2 to-go boxes on the console. I picked up my phone once more as an act of ritual. Another dozen calls had landed while we danced. I pressed select all, then delete, and watched the count drop to 0. The dashboard clock glowed 12:03. Alex laced his fingers with mine. We drove off into our life, the pavilion shrinking in the rear view, garlands dimming to a memory I knew I would keep polished. The letter arrived 3 weeks after the wedding in a stiff white envelope with my father's name engraved across the flap. No return address, just the kind of paper you buy when you want people to think you're important. Inside, 2 typed pages. I read them at the kitchen counter with Alex slicing limes for tacos, the scent of cilantro steadying me. My father used the same phrase so many times it started to sound like a brand slogan, genius as a businesswoman. I counted. 14. 14 praises for my genius as a businesswoman, 14 nods to strategy, execution, market foresight. Not one word about love. Not one sentence that said he was sorry. He suggested a synergy dinner. He proposed a family advisory council. He floated the idea of formalizing our brand as leaders. He signed with tremendous pride. He never wrote, "Your dad." I folded the pages and slid them back into the envelope. Alex raised an eyebrow, reading my face like a weather report. "Forecast," he asked. "Cloudy with a chance of meetings," I said. We ate on the balcony and let the letter sit, heavy and light at the same time. My reply was brief. "Thank you for the note. I'm focusing on my marriage and my company. No joint ventures. No councils. Warmly, Amber." I did not ask how he was. It felt like putting a period at the end of a sentence that had run on for too many years. Trevor tried a more modern route. He sent his resume to an Aurora Venues alias, then texted me a screenshot so it wouldn't get lost. His cover letter was full of confidence and buzzwords, storytelling, reach, conversion, and a line that made me exhale through my nose. Given our family connection, I can quickly integrate with leadership and shape public narrative. He asked for a director title and proposed a starting salary that would have insulted every manager who'd built our reputation brick by brick. Policy is a boring word until it protects you. Ours says we don't hire immediate family of executives, and we especially don't do it when the entire company can smell the shortcut. I forwarded the resume to HR with a note: "Do not hire." In the months that followed, the noise faded in weird, predictable waves. My mother posted a photo of hydrangeas with a caption about strong daughters, which was as close to apology as her thumbs could manage. Distant cousins surfaced with congratulations typed like invitations. Old classmates pinged me to grab coffee and pick my brain. I adopted a habit of pausing before every reply. Does this move me toward the life we're making? If not, I let the message rest. Screens don't deserve that much of me. A year slipped by like a good song on repeat. In October, Alex and I bought a house on the lake. Not a mansion, not a brag, 3 bedrooms, a dock that made sense for a canoe, a kitchen that wanted pancakes on Saturdays. The first morning we woke there, mist hugged the water and a blue heron stood so still it looked painted on. I made coffee while Alex opened every window to let the quiet in. We carried our mugs to the dock and didn't talk for a long time. Holidays rearranged themselves without ceremony. Friends who couldn't fly home came with their grief and their pies. We passed plates and stories, and someone always did the dishes even if it wasn't their mess. When a pipe burst in their rental, we had 3 sleeping bags on our floor and a karaoke machine we regretted at exactly 2 a.m. When Maya's mother got sick, we meal prepped labels and filled her freezer. When I had a rough week, someone else drove and returned my car full of gas and a new strawberry-scented air freshener that made me laugh. We took turns being the sturdy one. Sometimes my phone still lit up with my mother's curated brightness or Trevor's new scheme or my father's latest article clipped and forwarded as proof of relevance. I'd read just enough to know the shape of their lives and then place the device face down, the way you do with a book you're not ready to enter. I wasn't angry. I was elsewhere. It surprised me how peaceful that could feel. My blood family stayed exactly where they had always been, in their fortress of appearances, rules, and status games. They had money, but no warmth, reputations, but no love. For years, I mistook their coldness for discipline and their sarcasm for guidance. Only now, standing on the other side of it all, do I see the truth. What they offered was never real love, only conditional approval that changed with the balance of a bank account. On my wedding day, I lost my parents, but gained something far greater. Sweet freedom. Freedom from their manipulations, their endless comparisons, their attempts to make me feel small. My father's letter, stuffed with the word genius, but empty of affection, was the final confirmation. He admired only what could benefit him. My mother's sudden pride, my brother's opportunism, they all proved that blood alone does not guarantee love. And I realized I no longer needed their approval to feel whole. True family is not measured by surnames or traditions. It is measured in laughter around the table, in people who call you when you are sick, in friends who stand by you even when you have nothing to offer but your heart. That is what Alex and I built in our home by the lake. That is what money cannot buy. If you are watching this and you felt invisible in your own family, know this. You are not alone. Sometimes, Losing the people who should have loved you is the only way to finally see who truly does. Have you seen how greed, favoritism, or coldness can destroy family bonds? Share your own experiences in the comments below. I want to hear your story. And if mine touched you, hit like and subscribe. Let's build a community where no one has to feel invisible in their own home ever again.